Well, stretch out here at a nice little unique place. I'm Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us to stay curious today with the American Space Museum and one of our docents and a really great guy for many years involved with this museum, Eric Baker. Eric, thank you
Howdy.
for coming today. How you doing?
Doing good, doing good.
Museum was kind of busy today on our
Yeah,
national holiday of
yeah.
President's Day.
Had some folks from New York State, folks from Germany that just moved here, and some locals.
Yeah, it's been a good day at the museum, and we're glad that you're with us today. We're going to talk about some subjects that I'm curious about, and one of them is the test project engineer position. That is a very very. He's going to tell us about it. Eric's going to tell us about it. It's a very important position. They're all important. You can't really put anybody above anybody. But so what's a TPE? I'm curious about test project engineer. And then I'm sitting next to a guy that had a chance to be inside this living room. Where are we at, Eric?
This is the beach house.
Ah, the famous beach house. Well, it looks like there might be a liquor bottle or wine bottle or two up there.
This does not look quite as fancy as when I was there.
Oh, is that right?
But,
You were there in the early 1990s, correct?
Yeah.
And for this mission we're going to talk about today,
Mhm.
STS-60. And what was unique about that mission you want to share with us today?
Well, STS-60 was the first time we took a Russian cosmonaut up on the space shuttle on the orbiter.
This is 1993, I believe, right?
Yeah.
I can consult my shuttle scroll here to be accurate before Steve Jokums corrects me up there. He's from our Lake County Spaceport up in Illinois. Yeah, 60 was on my shuttle scroll 1994, February this month, one of the shuttles of the month. And we'll talk about that. And you got to be inside here, so I'm curious about that. And we'll see what that's all about. But Eric, first, and I got to give a shout out to Marty Winkle, our co-producer there. He's going to move that slide over between us there in a few seconds here. Marty, how you doing, buddy? We forgot to say, there you go. No problem there. That is a TPE. I heard the term, didn't understand exactly what it was and how important it was, but we're going to talk about that. And you actually had something to do with that patch, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
You designed it.
I did.
Well, I think that's pretty cool. That's on the back of Eric's jacket. Here is an aerial of the famed beach house. Took this from a Instagram post by somebody. Either took a drone or something over that. I'm sure it's a NASA photo, or it'd be illegal to take, wouldn't it?
Yep. It's a no drone zone.
Yeah, in there. So we're going to talk about this famed place where. Well, what was the beach house famous for, Eric?
Well, from what I understand, of course, it was left over from when Cape Canaveral and Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge were bought up for the Eastern Test Range. And so people had farms out here and businesses and vacation homes. And so when this was one of the few that was not torn down, and it was used over a number of, I know it was used during shuttle. They would have functions out there. One of the things they told us when it came up was that often it was the last time that an astronaut crew would be with their family before they went into isolation and stuff for whatever mission they were on. So.
Yeah, very famous. Marty, would you hand me my notes I left on the desk there? My notes say it was bought for like $35,000 back in the 1960s. Yeah, that's it there. I printed them out, but forgot to grab them there as we doing a lot of other things today. Thank you, Marty. It was, bought for, they cleared out people. Eminent domain, I guess, is the word I'm looking for there. And become a famous place where particularly the Gemini and Apollo astronauts chilled out with their families and friends, barbecues, that sort of thing there. Well, we're going to celebrate, we're going to talk about that. Eric's going to take us to behind the scenes there in just a minute. But here's the 11 beautiful shuttles launched in the month of February. Every orbiter was launched, all 5 of them in February, orbiting the Earth for 106 days. You see some famous missions there, the Untethered Flight 41B. 3 of them launched on February 3rd, Eric. But being so close to the action there, you might not have thought about that, but each over a year apart, of course. 130 in the middle, that's Kay Heyer, we'll see a picture of her. She was a test project engineer. That was her flight. She went on with the cupola.
Yep.
That's why that looks like that. And ironically, you're going to talk about the first, but technically, mission with Russia, STS-63, and then 60. And then a year later, 63 was the first rendezvous, but not docking, with Eileen Collins and Weatherby going around there. So this was a mission that did not go to the Mir space station, but communicated with the astronauts. And Eric's going to give us a little bit insight of how complicated this is and why we took such baby steps to do that. Eric, we have a lot of good people in our museum. Here was a gentleman from Britain who has a shuttle, bunch of tattoos of space.
Well, looks like he has a Saturn V also.
He's got the Saturn V. He's got a command module up there on his arm, and on his forearm there. Beautiful tattoo of the shuttle. And you being a docent, I bet you haven't seen that on anybody yet.
No, that's a first.
That's a pretty good looking one too there. But just sharing you some of the things about our museum here. Well, here's the mission that we're going to talk about with the Charlie Bolden on his 4th flight. Ken Reitler was a second time being a pilot, but then he never flew again. That kind of puzzles me, why he didn't want to be a commander. Jan Davis, her 2nd and 3rd flights. We love Jan. We're going to brag about her here in a couple minutes. Ron Sega, his 1st of 2. Franklin Chang Diaz, his 4th of 7 flights, tied with Story Musgrave for the most. And Sergei Krikalev there. And that's right above your head, Sergei there. His 3rd of 6 space flights. And Sergei is the 4th most experienced astronaut in the world, behind over 800 and some days, behind his 3 other of his Russian counterparts in there. So, beautiful launch that Tom Usiak took with his crew back in 1994. Early morning launch, and we'll talk about some of that flow here in a minute. But yeah, just a beautiful morning launch there. And there you are. We want to brag about how you've been a docent for a long time with us, off and on. And we appreciate you talking to kids. Like you said, we had a pretty good house full today. And any more comment about the people's reactions to our museum? Or
they are generally, they're surprised if what all is in here, and the fact that everything was donated by workers from both the Kennedy side and the Cape Canaveral side. That as the facilities for a specific type of rocket were completed, if they couldn't recycle it for something else on site, it was sold for scrap or thrown into the dumpster. So our people would go buy it, the workers, techs, engineers, administrators, and then they would take it home until their significant other said, you got to get rid of this stuff. It's just taking up too much room. Because people amassed large collections. And what we have on display here is just a small part of what some of the people have done.
Absolutely. There might be, I'm sure there's private collections that have more items than we do in many ways. There's real shuttle fanatics out there. Marty's got a comment for us on the UCAC family microphone.
Yeah, we have a comment from Neil 1030. He says, Jerry Ross also had 7 missions.
Yes, Story Musgrave.
No, Jerry Ross.
Oh, Jerry Ross. Yes, Jerry Ross. That's right. In fact, Franklin Chang Diaz, I might check that. I think, okay. Thank you for correcting me there. We'll push ahead here. What I wanted to get to was here's a picture of Eric also on Stay Curious back in the day, COVID day. Eric, we're looking at our 1000th episode that we're going to celebrate on February 29th, Leap Day. I think the 27th is the actual day of our 1000th. You've been part of this from when we didn't have green screens and we had a barrier for the COVID and so forth. Thank you for being part of our program here and wanting to do more to share with these people, because these people, being space nuts, love hearing about the shuttle and other programs from the people that worked it like yourself. So it's very important to us. So tell us a little bit about yourself, a brief thumbnail, where you grew up. You got a family full of space workers now too.
Yes, I was born in Ohio, just outside of Wright Pat, in a little place called Springfield. But my mother hated the cold weather, so she moved the family. We all went down to Miami, and I'm from 5 years old on raised in Miami, Florida. And always, from Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, if there was a launch going on, we had the black and white TV turned on in our living room, because a lot of them were early in the morning and you could watch them before you went to school. And eventually went into the Air Force and became an avionics technician, where I learned about electrons and navigation gear and got my first computer training. And when I got out, I eventually went back to school for an engineering degree, and found out I've been following, while I was in college, the approach and landing tests that they were doing out at Edwards Air Force Base. And if I knew there was a test flight, I would go to one of the audiovisual places, like usually one of the large auditorium classrooms, and go to the back room and say, hey, get this on the TV. And then we would all watch the approach and landing test, where they came off the 747 and landed on the desert.
We had an important part of the shuttle in 1977 out there with Gordon Fullerton, Fred Hayes.
Orbiter Enterprise.
Yep, Orbiter Enterprise, named after you Star Trekkies Enterprise out there.
Mm-hmm.
And where is the Enterprise right now?
It's in New York City on the aircraft carrier right there on Intrepid.
Yep, Intrepid out there. Also, the two astronauts involved with that was the Admiral Truly and I want to say Joe Engel.
Yeah, I think Engel, yeah.
Yeah, there. But correct me out there if I'm wrong here. We're enjoying listening to Eric Baker here talk a little bit about his career as a shuttle worker. So you got hired in?
Well, I had, actually, when I was getting ready to graduate from college, I found out that one of my classmates was co-oping up here with Rockwell on the space shuttle. Found out they were hiring, and I sent out only one resume, when I was getting ready to graduate, and came up here and interviewed with Rockwell and got hired.
1 for 1.
Yep.
Okay, good for you there. And never looked back, I'm sure.
It was a great, best job in the world.
And well, you do a great job sharing that job in there. And you became a test project engineer. Look at that. All right. Love the jacket there. You designed that. Tell us a little bit about what.
Well,
how do you become a test project engineer? How many are there? What do they do?
At the time, we when I first started in June of 1980, I don't remember if they had them during the Apollo program, if they had an integration console. But for Space Shuttle, because everything was in one firing room, all the systems, they decided they needed a higher overview of the vehicle technically. They had test conductors up at the front of the room that were going over what was scheduled for that day, and who was supposed to be in the firing room for what test, but they didn't really have a technical oversight. The vehicle was it's not that it was more complicated than Apollo or the other systems, but it was just like we were doing it repetitively more often. And one of our engineers in the DPS, data processing system for the onboard computers, had just left our office, become one of the original TPEs, a gentleman named Greg Weber, and he still hadn't finished cleaning out his desk, so I would see him every once in a while. And then once I had sufficient training in DPS, I would see him over at the integration console while I was supporting console C12. Now, generally, you had to have about 5 years experience on shuttle before you were considered for moving over to TPE. And the nice thing about working on the onboard computer systems is that our systems, because the orbiter was a fly-by-wire vehicle, and just about all the data went through the onboard computers. And so we basically just by osmosis absorbed data from the other systems. We would often be back at C12, and after we had powered the computers up for the day and we're just sitting there monitoring, there were 4 systems that were always on station. DPS for the computers, instrumentation for all the sensors, EPD for power, and ECLSS, environmental control systems for cooling. And everybody else would come in and out if they had a test that day. But we were always there as the big 4 with integration, and the integration console could monitor our system. So if we needed a break and we didn't have enough people on console, you could go to the bathroom or, get a cup of coffee and come back, and integration would be, doing the overview. But you generally had to have at least 5 years of experience, and the TPE office, generally stole the best ones they could from the subsystems. So we had people from, the booster side, the tank side, the orbiter subsystems, and once you moved over to test project, you went through a whole nother level of on-the-job training, learning even more depth about the subsystems. And then you got each subsystem, each console in the firing room had various levels of what they called standboarding, where they would basically certify you to work. On some of the systems that were more complicated, you might go through 2 or 3 levels of just the ground support equipment, especially with the high energy propellants, like with the OMS RCS, before you even got to the orbiter. And they would just work their ways up through those, each time they would finish a training series and work that portion of the system on the console, they could then, start the next one. DPS, we just basically, had the computers, the flight displays, and then we also took care of RMS.
DPS is an acronym.
Data processing system.
Data processing system.
For the orbiter.
Gotcha.
Not to be confused with LPS, launch processing system, computers on the ground monitoring the orbiter.
Which Marty was part of that.
Eventually. He was in the DPS office when I started, and I was OJTing under him for working the engine controllers on the orbiter main engines. And then that got split off, and he went over to the SSME side, staying with the engine controllers before he eventually did software.
Well, we're in the trenches with Eric Baker here at the launch control facility of the space shuttle. In 1994, you're going to take us there. I'm impressed with him talking. I can follow him. This is a complicated system. All space travel is.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about today is going on with today's companies. In fact, I think we're bringing back Crew 7 on Wednesday morning, I saw a blurb on that, but we'll catch up with that later. But there's some very You got to be pretty doggone smart. You said 5 years. How long did it take you to become a TPE?
Well, it was about 5 years.
Okay.
I'd been doing DPS for about that long, and got a recommendation from one of the other TPEs and interviewed, and they took me in.
Well, here's 6 beautiful test project engineers there. One of them kind of overachieved. Tell us, you're of course in your red jacket. Who's beside that lady beside? Tell us.
That's
who
Sue
everybody is.
Herman.
Sue Herman.
She came out of the fuel cell world. She actually worked for the fuel cell vendor, and then came to work for the vehicle side of it. And
Well, Stu, glad to see you there. This is at the Rocket Ranch reunion a couple
Yep.
of years ago.
yeah, she worked for the fuel cell side. Then she became a TPE. Then she took early retirement and sailed around the world with her husband for a couple of years, and then came back and started working at the Space Center again.
Wow. We'll have to talk to her someday.
Oh yeah,
Get her on
Yeah,
here.
she's still in
with
the
her
area.
husband. And who's got the big beard in the background?
That's
there?
Greg Koch.
Greg
He
Koch.
he came out of ECLSS, Environmental Control and Life Support, and he was the tallest TPE. He beat me out just a little bit.
Yeah, he eked you out just a little bit. Someone's always taller, isn't it? And then next,
That's Larry Clark,
yeah,
and he did I'm not exact. I know he did SRBs, but I'm not sure if that's where he came from originally.
Larry's on our board for a while.
Yeah.
in there. And then the two other.
Matter of fact,
ladies
he
that-
went out to California this past year to help the gentleman who was putting together the Endeavor exhibit, where they have
Did
a full,
he? He didn't tell me about
a
that.
full shuttle stack. He went out there to help coordinate the solid rocket motor stacking.
Well, I'm calling Larry when we get done here and get him on board to talk about that.
And of course, the young lady next to Larry is Kay Heyer. Now, she was a Naval Academy graduate, one of the first women through the Annapolis, and
Yes,
had
she was very proud of that. She is,
a
too.
career as a P3 crew person, P3 Orion anti-submarine planes. We had another TPE, not in this picture, a gentleman named Steve Page, who was a pilot on P3 Orions.
Oh, okay.
And Kay worked in the back with all the wizards and doing the secret squirrel stuff to detect the submarines. But she's a mechanical engineer, and she was a part of the contractor team that activated OPF-3, where they took all of the Vandenberg orbiter processing facility work stands and brought them here to make our third OPF hangar.
I didn't know that's how it worked out. And
then
then
she became a mechanical engineer for Orbiter, and then a TPE, and then got into the astronaut corps.
and she flew twice in space, and
Yes,
she's
she
one of
did.
our February astronauts, and on 133, the cupola that went up there, 132, 130, whatever it is. I'll figure that out in a second. But yes, Kay, what a great lady she is, and one day we'll have her on Stay Curious. 130 was her mission.
The last lady there, that's Melinda Tribe, and she came out of the software world, but then went into MPS, main propulsion systems, and did main propulsion processing for a number of years, and then moved over to the test product office. She's married to John Tribe, who was the manager of the OHMS RCS subsystem for the vehicle, and eventually went back to the Boeing mothership when Boeing bought Rockwell Space Division, and and he was in charge of Boeing for a while. But he's one of the living legends of the shuttle program.
Absolutely.
He started back on the Atlas for England.
Yes, John Tribe from Britain came over here. We've had him on Stay Curious several times. His last appearance was really a good one, even talking about his boyhood times of being bombed by V2 rockets, about 10 years old. But yeah, Melinda, great. She said she will not come on Stay Curious.
I've nudged her a couple
yeah,
times, but
we've enough nudged her. We have to, we respect that. But so there's a little background. There's just some ordinary folks that overachieved. One become an astronaut, but they all involved with launching our shuttle program as a test project engineer. I want to. As we're relaxing here with Eric Baker at the beach house. Yes, sir, we're in the famous beach house there. Looking for the waiter, Marty, to fix us up a drink. I'd like a little lemonade or something.
Right there.
And a sandwich. How about some, corned beef on rye? Be good with me on there. So
the one time I got to go, it was pretty much self-serve. So
was it?
You were on your
but
own.
at least they had something.
Yeah.
Well, hope you're all enjoying this. I wanted to give you a little thumbnail. 4 months of our wonderful Discovery orbiter with the tail number OV-103 from it landing on STS-61. It landed on September 22nd, 1993 on its 17th mission. That was a SPA, an Orpheus, a real science mission. After landing in September 93, it was towed to the Orbital Processing Facility and worked there from September to January. So first week of January. So really September, October, November, December, less than 3 months. It's in the vehicle assembly building, mating it to the external tank and twin solid rocket boosters, then rolled out to the pad 39A on about January 10th. So from September to January 10th, September, October, November, December, January. That's less than 4 months from landing. It is out on the pad again. And then you did something called a very important thing that I've learned, the Terminal Countdown Demonstration Test, the TCDT.
And basically what that is a full countdown dress rehearsal without loading propellant.
And the astronauts are there, suited up.
They come in for that. We have when I was vehicle lead for 103, I put together the engineering briefing for the flight crew where we would go over, I would get inputs from all of my system engineers, and it was basically a background of all the problems the vehicle had on its last flight, and then during the processing from landing until that point. So we would go over all the major anomalies that we had, especially if there was an unexplained anomaly, because and anything that specifically the crew could help us with. If there was something that the vehicle was doing that only occurs when it's on orbit because you're out of just the way the Earth's gravity pulls on the vehicle can change how it works, how the liquids flow in the fluid systems, whether it's the water or the freon for the cooling or the propellants for the orbital maneuvering systems. All of those things react differently once you get it out of the gravity well. And so sometimes you can only test it when it's upstairs. They had a problem with one of the galleys, and of course it only leaked when it was on orbit, and so it took them several flights to track down that specific problem. And so we would have a briefing, and we would sit down with the flight crew. They would come in, all my engineers and their NASA counterparts, and we would go over all those problems, and then they would tell us about the upcoming mission and what they were going to be doing. And then if they had specific questions that had not been in the briefing, then we would have the engineer come forward and answer the question, or if they had to go gather more data, they would do that, and then we would supply it back to the astronaut office.
Now, Eric, when you did a terminal countdown test, demonstration test, a terminal countdown demonstration test, Did you do it the same time of day that the actual launch was going to be done?
No, not really.
Okay.
Because
Because a lot of these launches are 3 a.m., 2:30 a.m.
right. No, this was all basically done so that T0 was just about lunchtime,
Okay.
and that allowed everybody to. It gave the crew, they knew what time they had to be there. They didn't spend too much time on their backs, because you had to load them. They were limited about how much time they could be in the seats like that.
Like 4 hours, I believe.
And so we took it all the way down to usually about, we would not get to engine start. About 25 seconds, they would generally, have some sort of abort scenario. And they would then actually test the crew. We would declare an abort. We would start going into the safing for the whole vehicle. And then they would have an emergency egress test. They would get out of the vehicle as fast as possible, come around the catwalks, get into the slide wire baskets, and then declare victory.
Okay, they wouldn't use it. But would they fuel the
No,
they
no.
wouldn't fuel the ET.
They would only do a tanking test for the first mission of an orbiter, and it was called a wet CDDT. And
so the inaugural flight of each orbiter, you would do a wet
tanking test.
Okay.
But for all subsequent flights, they did not.
That was probably a little bit nerve-wracking.
But they would usually do that and do an FRF. They would a flight readiness firing, where they would fire the engines for about 20 seconds. But there was nobody on board.
That had to be exciting.
Well, FRFs were always very big. They were, you'd have a big plume of steam come out, but you didn't light the solids.
You didn't.
Because otherwise it's going somewhere.
It's going somewhere. Well, I'm fascinated by all this and hope you are and learning something here as we stay curious with Eric Baker today. Eric, we're going to talk about this launch here. It was launched at 7:10 a.m. on February 3rd, 1994, I think I said, 93. No, it's 94. Yeah, there it is. Went up there on my scroll. Let's look at a couple pictures here. It was about the Wakefield. This was a very scientific payload. The main deal was the space hab in the back here, where astronauts did a lot of science. This is the emblem of it that shows where am I going there? Oh, there we are. Showing the launch there. All right. Mark Usiak there at the countdown clock. Where would you watch the launch? Probably saw it about like this.
No, I'd be in the firing room.
Oh yeah, that's right. You'd be in the firing room.
I'd be at the integration console.
Okay.
Basically at the backup console, because we had the NASA's OPE would be the sitting at integration, and actually I'd be sitting there at integration with them. We'd have other TPEs at backup, and
well, what was the rattling of the windows like?
Not too bad. Not because the you'd hear a little bit of it, but we're 3.5 miles away and we're inside, and they had fairly sturdy windows, but the OPE did most of the talking during terminal count, my NASA counterpart, and actually the SPE, the shuttle project engineer, who was in the OPE office. And so by the time we got down to our work had been done, and we were just sitting there, watching stuff and make sure as the milestones came across the screen, we were just sitting there waiting to see if an anomaly came up. And so terminal countdown, unless you had a scrub or something, is really boring. It's just getting through the milestones and hoping that you don't have to do it again the next day because you scrubbed for some reason.
Mm-hmm. Well, we had a very eclectic crew up there. This is billed as the first cooperation with Russia in 1993. I mean 94. I keep saying 94. So that's 30 years ago that Americans and Russians flew together, and there we have the astronauts there. Did you want to comment about that now? About
Well, the one thing that most people probably don't know, Charlie Bolden was the first person to ever actually ride an emergency escape slide wire basket from the top of the crew access arm on the fixed service structure down to the ground.
yeah, and he did that on STS-60.
I don't know if he did it on 60. It might have been part of Return to Flight.
Well, just give us the crew here. Charlie Bolden's in the upper right hand there. His fourth and last flight. Twice a pilot, twice a commander. 8 years the NASA administrator under President Obama. Ken Reitler, his second and last flight. Ken is to the right of him there. Of course, Jan Davis is down at the bottom. Her second of 3 flights. Ron Sega, his first of 2. He's to the right there, looking at Jan. And then the other 2 on the far left there is Franklin Chang Diaz, and then on his 4th flight, and Sergei Krikalev, his 3rd of 6 flights there.
Well, we other than giving them the briefing, during just when they were down for their countdown demonstration test, we did not normally socialize with the crews all that much, because they were busy and we were busy. And so, we would see them, for that briefing. And the ones that we did work more was earlier in the program when we had on-site astronauts all the time. Part of the office called the Cape Crusaders was their unofficial title. And they were there. I worked with people like Ellison Onizuka and Dick Scobie and Marcia Evans, and especially when we were doing the RMS installation and checkout for STS-2. So those ones we might get to know a little bit more, because we would, need them to sign something, or if we had a special test, they would support it and report back to whoever the next flight crew was going to be. But the fact that I got to go for STS-60, I was invited out to the beach house for a dinner with the flight crew.
We're going to talk about how exciting that was when we look at the beach house here. We wanted to give some love to Jan Davis there out at the Space Center a couple weeks ago. Marty and I thoroughly enjoyed her. She's going to be a snowbird down here, splitting her time between Huntsville and here. And her father was a B-17 pilot.
Oh, cool.
And she wrote a book about their kind of parallel careers there. So we want you to stay curious and buy that book, everybody, and help our new museum friend Jan Davis there. There's Sergei Krikalev. He's still involved in the Roscosmos. He was the man who was without a country in 1991 when the wall fell and Soviet Union became Russia. He was in space on Mir, and technically a man without a country there for a while. There's that Wake Shield experiment, very complex but important, testing the vacuum of space and whether we can make circuitry and polymers and stuff like that in that, right?
Well, it's the interesting thing about Wake Shield is the fact, of course, that people think about, well, you're in low Earth orbit, you're in outer space, it's empty, but there's empty, and then there's really
Yes.
empty. And so basically this experiment was picked up by the remote manipulator arm and then positioned so that the far side of it was away from the direction of travel, so that any of the tenuous particles that were there had to go around it. So there was a even harder vacuum on the wake side, the shielded side, so they could see if they, if that would enhance whatever physical properties they wanted to experiment with.
Because you're still in Earth orbit. You get between the Earth and the Moon, there's less
Right.
stuff going on there. But they're trying to create the ultimate vacuum Jan Davis would be the remote manipulator arm there. So you tossed in a couple things like this from the mission that people see, and we didn't get a very high resolution of it there, but I brought one from another mission here, Eric, from 82 to kind of give everybody a look here of these are neat little pass out things that have a ton of information on it about the flow of this mission and where things should be on certain flight day 1 through whatever the flight day is, the cargo payloads and so forth. So what's your comment about these little?
Well, they basically, as part of the employee incentive system, they would, for every flight, they would pass out stuff just to keep people focused that, there were people we were sending up that were doing important work for us. And, we had to treat every flight like the very first one. And this was just part of of that program to, not that we needed a whole lot of incentive, but we did enjoy getting this stuff. And it during the processing of a vehicle, you're so focused on your little portion of the pie of the flow chart that it's easy to lose the bigger picture of who we're sending up that time. What are we sending up? What is the science going to be? That and stuff like this would be
just little morale booster things,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
To let you know, hey, here's a sheet of what this crew, these 7 human beings or 6 human beings are going to do on flight day 1, and it actually has it broke down to timeline.
Their time is broke down to practically the minute. They might have an hour a day of personal time that they could take a breath, but if they weren't working, sleeping, exercising, or eating, they every once in a while they'd have a little bit of time to look out the window.
Mm-hmm.
But they were always busy, and we would use these, especially if we were early in the program. We would always have somebody on console, even after launch, monitoring the mission. We even did extra training to, in case there was a hurricane hit Houston and they lost all power and mission control went down, we could do a backup mission control from Kennedy Space Center. So we did an actual a test scenario of that.
Uh-huh.
So, but this would give us insight on stuff that we might have to do for them until they got people out here or they got Houston back online.
Mm-hmm. Well, this was an important mission of cooperation with the Russians 30 years ago, the first time, and there was communication things. They didn't go to the Mir space station, but they communicated with the cosmonauts on board. On the 5th day in orbit, President Bill Clinton visited Johnson Space Center, stopped by Mission Control. NASA Administrator was Dan Golden at the time. And President Clinton praised the crew, saying, quote, "I think this is the first step in what will become the norm in global cooperation. And when we get this space station finished, it's going to be a force for peace and progress that will be truly historic. And you have played a major role in that 30 years ago. And you played a role in that."
The patch itself of the mission has the American flag stylized with the Russian Federation flag.
Yep. Let's go to that right back there. Thank you, Marty. Yep. American flag, Russian flag, 30 years ago. And we're still cooperating. 3 Russians on the International Space Station. It's a tense situation, of course, with the Ukraine war going on, and it is a war to our European friends that talk about it. But it has set the model for how we should act on Earth. And golly, have you ever thought about the International Space Station receiving the Nobel Peace Prize? It's never been nominated, but it's been thought about. But what more perfect of an example? What do you think, Eric?
Well, that would certainly, be a worthwhile use of that prize.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about us hanging out here at the beach house, and you got to hang out with these astronauts. Here they are in space, of course, flying around there. So let's just fast forward to the beach house a little bit. Some pictures I pulled off about it. There's that beautiful aerial of it. So you got to go out there. What time of day was it? What'd you eat?
It was basically in the evening after work. So you did a full day, and they had told us a couple days before that we had been invited, and
That's not your Corvette.
no,
there, is it? Okay.
no. In '94 I was driving a van of some sort, I believe.
But there's what it looks like for everybody curious, just like me. The different furniture when you were there.
Yes,
This is more like 2020, late 2010s, somewhere in there.
Yeah, I just recall a fairly empty room with some tables and a kitchen off to the side, and
Well, we're going to see that. Of course, they have a little bit of adult beverages there and signed bottles of wine and so forth with their mission patches on it. It could be, particularly back in the day of Apollo and Mercury and Gemini, it was a real emotional experience for the families to be there. Another look at the wide there, but they took 2 bedrooms and made a big conference room out of it.
Yeah, that's sort of like what it looked more like that when we were having dinner.
So, burgers and fries or steak and eggs.
I don't really remember.
Okay.
It was.
Well, there's the ocean. You got to see the beach there. And so Dave Stange up in Michigan, that's what the beach looks like. All of you there. John Borelli up in New York. Come on down. I'd love to get your toes wet in the Atlantic Ocean down here a little bit there. Eric, what was that experience like? I mean, you're around these astronauts. What were they like? They're just all business wanting to know.
The astronauts are just like people, I mean, worked with Kay Hire. She was, they're focused. They do not suffer fools, lightly. And, but we had the training that I received from, the older Apollo and Gemini engineers was, if something is wrong, you bring it up immediately. If you screw up, you can be forgiven a lot, but not covering up anything. If you screw up, if you say, I did that, I was trying to do this, this happened, that was my fault, and you'll be okay. You try to, shove something under the rug, you're out of there. They will not tolerate that. And you've got to maintain that mindset.
Huh.
Even with, and especially, with the higher launch rates, like for SpaceX and all the other companies that want to, to do these quicker launches, just because you got more of them, it's like you did it for the first time. It's such a high energy system that it's unforgiving. We don't have the energy systems to make a vehicle so robust that you can get it off the ground. So it has to have margins, and you've got to, even if you're not testing everything like we did on shuttle, the flight itself is a test. But if you have any inkling in your data that something ain't right, you've got to go in further and look at it.
Well, I like how Eric explains everything here, and I hope that Steve Jokums is enjoying this, and Dave Stange. Mark Usiak's watching. We had one of his photos in there today. It's a testament to space workers like Eric, that they keep this. this attitude throughout your whole life. If I've learned one thing about being around space workers for the last 7 years, is they're very safety minded in a good way.
Yeah.
Most of your meetings start out with a safety tip, correct?
Yeah, yeah. You had and every year they would have basically a safety day, and they would shut everything down. Everybody would come out, and they would have safety vendors, with some of the newer products for like
Personal protection equipment,
Exactly.
gear, that sort of
stuff for home use or stuff for you might see on the Space Center. They always had a trailer that the technicians and stuff that the company would buy them the steel-toed shoes and stuff.
Right.
And so they always had some of those on safety day.
Were you guys, was NASA employees some of the first ones to get or see about a fire detector in your home, or carbon monoxide detectors, that sort of thing?
Well, the technology for that may have come from parts of the space programs, some of the miniaturized stuff. We did, I know that they developed some of the early infrared detectors, for hydrogen fires. You can't see a hydrogen fire.
Yeah, and that's what we're fueling a shuttle with.
Exactly. They had, of course, the second stage and the Marty. You can correct me if they set fire to a security car, that there was a report of a fire prior to a shuttle I don't think it was shuttle, but an Apollo launch. And they basically drove out into a cloud of liquid oxygen gas, which means that when the car went in there, an engine compartment is greasy and nasty, and it's sparking. And they drove into it, and the car's caught on fire because the oxygen level was so high. Wow. That they started. They would put if they were doing some sort of tanking test, and somebody had to go in there, they would take a straw broom and tie it to the front of the car and ease their way in to see if it was catch on fire. But especially when we started having the hydrogen leaks on the ETs, they went in and put in all sorts of much higher tech infrared detectors that would see any kind of heat imbalance.
Better than a straw broom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you did what you had to do.
Was that the same the broom crew that came in to close the?
No, that's a different broom.
Yeah, that's a different broom.
That's a different broom. That was because the hydraulics had to be weakened on the landing gear, so you didn't knock the tile off the landing gear door.
Right. Yes, I've heard about the broom crew from that. We're going to have Terry White, who told us about that, on our program Thursday. We're going to have a National Space Society. Bert Dick will be here on Wednesday talking to us about memberships and a partnership the National Space Society and American Space Museum are going to do. But we appreciate you being here today, and you're just one of hundreds of people that are honored out there at Spaceview Park, just like Marty is. There's your name, Eric Baker, Rockwell, Lockheed Martin there at our beautiful stainless steel iconic shuttle monument at Spaceview Park, just a few blocks from where we're sitting there. There's your close-up of your name there, Eric. It's people like Eric out there talking about the American Space Museum on a regular basis, telling people that they need to not just come here, but just not as a tourist, but we're a nonprofit, and we need people's financial help in other ways there too. Yep. So
you can be a member.
You can be a member for $25 single membership, $40 for the whole family, and you can go to our website and find out ways to do that. But we just always want to mention that. But so TPE, Eric Baker, thank you so much. As we're kicked back here and taking us on a little tour of the famous beach house out there. So
well, thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome. And he's here most Mondays doing a tour. So if you plan your vacation around here and want to have Eric lead you around, you'll have a great insight to all of our artifacts here. So Neil 1030, thank you for watching. Tom Usiak's warming up a little bit in Pennsylvania. Cliff Watson, our friend down in Pomona, Australia, had a little medical setback. I'm glad you're feeling a lot better, Cliffy. Good that you got that out of the way. He's coming to America to see the solar eclipse April 8th, and we'll probably be here in our studio the week after that. Cynthia Rossi, you get some good autographs out there. She would testify what a great person Jan Davis is out there. Cynthia Rossi, one of our astronaut group out there. So glad that everybody's on board today. Marty, anything to clean up on our Streamlabs production?
Nope, we're clean.
All right. Well, Eric, thanks again for all you do for the museum. You've been involved with it a lot longer than I have, and I appreciate you sharing on this about the back scenes of launching a space shuttle from an engineering standpoint there. So have you back again, my friend.
Sure.
Look at something else we want to talk about. Till then, Tuesday, we're going to talk about shuttles of the month and some current events, all right? Wednesday, again, the National Space Society management director, Bert Dick, will be here. Thursday, it's going to be Terry White talking about some of the shuttles of the month of February. And Friday, we'll do a little astronomy and some future space things for you all out there to stay curious about. Until then, I'm Mark Marquette, thanking Eric Baker and saying we can't wait to see you in our museum to bridge the space between us. Right here in the beach house, huh?
Yeah.